Hello, everybody. Welcome to The World This Week. These were some of the major stories around the world.
Keystone XL pipeline would not serve the national interests of the United States.
And we'll talk more about some of these stories. With me this Sunday are Paula Slier, Middle East Bureau Chief at Russia Today, and Charles Bibleser, I-24 News. Paula, the British, the Americans have their intelligence pointing out to ISIS in this crash over the Sinai desert. What are the Russians waiting for?
Well, let me first preface what I'm going to say, that the Americans and the British haven't given any conclusive proof, and they've admitted as such that their investigators on the ground haven't actually examined the forensic evidence. So it's not conclusively proven that it is Islamic State behind these attacks. What the Russians have said, the Russian president has said that at this stage they are suspending all flights to and from Cairo. It is not an acknowledgement that there was a bomb on board, but it is just purely for security reasons. The Russian president saying that when it is cleared what exactly caused this plane to come down, he will react appropriately at that stage.
If it turns out there is intelligence for the Russians, is this a game changer on part of the Russian war on ISIS?
Well, it certainly is not a scenario that the Russians would have wanted. The first and foremost thing is that it presents the Russian president no longer as this strong symbol that is impenetrable. And this is not what Putin would have wanted to have happened. And basically the scenarios he now has at his hands, if indeed it was, as you say, Islamic State, are either to step up his attacks in Syria, he can potentially expand the Russian airstrikes into Iraq, or he could put a further clampdown on Muslim extremists both in Chechnya and in the Muslim states.
Right, but this is Sinai Desert. I mean, will Putin go there as well?
I don't think he'll go there. He has to be very mindful of his relationship with Egypt. Of course, the Russians and the Egyptians share close ties, and this is a relationship that has been growing in recent time. Many people have been pointing fingers that the Americans are slowly withdrawing from Egypt, or the Egyptians are slowly putting a back on the American support and are moving closer towards the Russians. So he's not necessarily going to want to start upsetting the situation on the ground, but he will play it out in terms of stopping the spread of Islamic extremism to Russia. He also needs to be very mindful of what the Russian public say, because if the Russian public, and again, let's assume that this was an Islamic State bomb and that hasn't been proven, but if the Russian public is calling for him to avenge the attack, he needs to respond. But the Russian public might very well not call for that. There might actually be pressure on him to withdraw from Syria for people being afraid that such attacks could be carried out in the future.
Charles, do you think there's someone in the White House smiling now and saying, "We told you so"?
As it pertains to Syria, perhaps. I mean, it's become a cauldron of simply. First of all, it's a complex mess. You had the U.S. Defense Secretary over the weekend saying that we have to do much more to combat ISIS, for example, in Iraq and Syria, now the Sinai, Libya, Afghanistan, etc. These statements echo previous Defense Secretaries, Panetta, as well as Gates, who were heavily critical of the Obama administration's handling of the war against ISIS. That being said, Obama is looking to do something because he's now been displaced by Iran, which has filled the vacuum in Iraq, as well as by Russia and Putin in particular in Syria. I don't know that he's happy because the American public seems not to be happy. Over 60% of them disapprove of Obama's handling of the war against ISIS. 40% of his foreign policy in general. He's an ideologue. He's bound by a legacy that is anti-war. I don't see him doing much to turn the tides.
Yeah, but now he's like putting boots on the ground, not putting boots on the ground in Iraq. What's going on?
These are advise and assist missions. His answer so far has been to send he will deploy something like 50 special forces to Syria. It's hard to imagine how this is going to have any direct impact on the ground, given the fact that ISIS controls a territory as large as Texas. You have growing dissent amongst Obama's advisors, military advisors in particular. I don't see him doing anything in particular.
Paula, does Putin want to be the cop of the world or just the strong man of the world?
Well, does Putin want to grow his power in the world? If I can start from there, because that's often a question people ask me. I certainly think that he has a presence in Syria, and he doesn't want to be kicked out of Syria by the Americans or the Europeans. The question is just how much does he want to grow that? And I think he does want to grow his presence there. Whether he wants to grow to be the cop of the world, I think he sees himself taking a role that the Americans have been playing up until now, whether it's with regards to the Israeli-Palestinian dialogue, whether it's with regards to what's happening in Egypt or elsewhere. He certainly sees the Middle East as a fertile ground for strengthening the position of Russia on the world stage.
PR-wise, as we saw, he did it already, and no red lights from the White House.
No, the White House isn't going to do anything to stop this, in my opinion. This is going to be a problem that's going to be handed over to the next U.S. president, whoever that may be. Ironically, the ghosts of Iraq are going to haunt Obama's legacy, in my opinion.
Charles and Paul, I thank you so much.
Thank you.
A major development in Turkey this week as President Erdogan secures his grip on power for at least 4 more years, and that puts him on the verge of becoming an absolute ruler. With us from Istanbul is Arzu Geybula. She's a Turkish blogger who closely follows Turkish politics. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Now, will Erdogan be able to fulfill his plan or dream to become an absolute ruler of Turkey?
That's the question of the day, actually. Right now, for him to fulfill this dream of his, he needs to change the constitution. And right at this moment, actually, there's a lot of discussion about the constitution itself, amending the constitution. But to change the constitution on his own, he cannot do. He needs the majority in the parliament, and his party didn't have enough seats in the parliament after these elections. So we are expecting changes in the constitution, but we're hoping that it won't be giving him all the powers that he needs to have, or he wants to have.
What is the source of his popularity these days?
Well, these days the source of popularity is fear. In between the June 7th elections and these elections, over 400 people died. This includes over 100 people who were killed during the Ankara bombing just weeks before the elections. And Turks don't like to be afraid, especially at a time when you have the ISIS, you have refugees coming in through Turkey, and you have internal issues within Turkey, like the fight with the PKK. And I think Erdogan's party and his prime minister, Davutoglu, played really well on the sense of fear that they created between June and November elections. And this is one of the main sources of his popularity at the moment. People don't want to be afraid, and a lot of the people who actually voted for HDP, the Kurdish party, in June elections, changed their votes back for the AKP.
But the Kurds had a political victory of their own.
Yes, they do. But when you look at the outcome and the results of the elections, it's not as high as it was during the June elections. And there's also a very big difference in celebrating the victory. After the June elections, most of the eastern part of Turkey, where you have majority Kurdish population, there were celebrations everywhere. People were very happy. They were very happy that this was a historical moment that finally Kurds made it into the Turkish parliament. But after these elections, I mean, even in the run-up to these elections, the atmosphere was very quiet. And the HDP actually announced right after Ankara bombings that they won't hold any rallies for the sake of safety.
Well, Erdogan was at odds with the Russians on Syria, on ISIS. Will that change, in your opinion, after his re-election?
Erdogan has a very interesting mind of his own, and it's always really hard to predict what's going to happen next, with an exception of that he just wants to be this powerful leader in the region and showcase his power. While he's on the bad terms with Putin and Assad, I do not think this is going to change much. And there's been, before the elections, there were discussions that, oh, if we don't have an agreement, if we don't come to an agreement with Russia, we can always go somewhere else, even though Russia is actually Turkey's #1 gas provider. And so Erdogan will keep the relations on the diplomatic level so that it doesn't have an impact on their economic relationship. But otherwise, I think politically, Erdogan is obviously not happy that Putin is using Turkey's airspace to bomb Syria. But he hasn't actually made any firm statements about his unhappiness about this current situation.
Arzu Geybullah in Istanbul, I thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
We would like to talk also more about freedom of speech in Turkey and generally around the world. With us is Johan Bir from Reporters Without Borders, a watch group that monitors journalistic freedom around the world. He joins us from Paris. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your invitation.
Well, it looks like Erdogan did anything he could to bolster his political win, and that included a crackdown on the media. What is the situation in Turkey right now?
The crackdown on the media has been one of the most evident symptoms of Erdogan's authoritarian drift over the past few years. Pluralism is diminishing. There is an increasing concentration of media ownership at hands of media barons who are close to Erdogan. There is an increasing judiciary crackdown on the media. The pressure has kept growing on the eve of the elections and even just afterwards, with several consecutive raids on critical media. On day one after the election, 2 journalists have been thrown to jail simply because of the cover of their magazine, which was critical of the elections. And on the same day, so day one after the elections, Monday the 2nd November, 71 journalists were fired at once. 71 journalists working for the Koza İpek media holding, the one that was raided by police last week.
So in these terms, Turkey is still far from other countries in Western Europe.
Unfortunately, inside the EU, the situation is more and more different between the different member states. And among EU members, you have Scandinavian states, which every year rank at the very top of the Press Freedom Index. But you also have countries such as Bulgaria or Greece, which have kept slipping down in the index year after year. So now inside the EU, you have countries ranking first and ranking, well, nearly 80th in our Press Freedom Index.
Mm-hmm. Well, tell me more about your index. How do you rank the different countries?
So the Press Freedom Index is based on questionnaires that we send across the world to a wide range of journalists, partner organizations, media organizations. So this questionnaire is then complemented by our own data on press freedom violations collected throughout the years. So this is the way the index is basically made. The questionnaire targets 7 different aspects of press freedom, including media independence, the internet, the legislative framework, etc., etc. So it's quite a comprehensive questionnaire. And the data that we add regard press freedom violations such as killed journalists, attacked journalists, journalists in jail, etc.
Mm-hmm. Overall, what are the changes you are seeing, especially since the social networks revolution?
There is now widespread use of massive surveillance, both in democratic and repressive states, and cyber censorship also has become the new norm, unfortunately. Many countries in the planet, what in the past used to be only used by countries such as China or Iran, is now almost the new norm, and most of the countries have adopted laws that allow websites to be blocked without a judiciary order, so without a debate and without the possibility for the website owner to defend itself. This is the case, among others, in Turkey, where cyber censorship has been on a harsh increase over the past few years, and where critical websites are now routinely blocked, and not only critical websites, but also platforms such as Twitter and YouTube. So something that would have been absolutely unbelievable a couple of years ago. This was a practice reserved for China, Iran again, and a couple of countries like that. So unfortunately, press freedom copes with increasing challenges on the internet and also in terms of journalist security.
Yeah, well, Johan Buhr in Paris, I thank you very much.
Thank you again.
And this has been The World This Week. We'll see you here next Sunday. Have a great week.